So before beginning, I'd like to define a few terms. Lawful permanent resident. This term refers to non-citizens who are lawfully authorized to live permanently within the United States. Lawful permanent residents may accept an offer of employment without special restrictions, own property, receive financial assistance from public universities and colleges, and join the armed forces. They may also apply to become U.S. citizens if they meet certain eligibility requirements. Department of Homeland Security. Refugee. Refugee status is a form of protection that may be granted to people who are of particular humanitarian concern to the United States. Refugees are generally people outside of their country who are unable or unwilling to return home because they fear serious harm. U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. Framework. Because this resolution says increased restrictions are beneficial, we can make the choice of which immigrants come into this country. Our opponents have the burden to prove that even the least beneficial immigrant is beneficial. Contention 1. Immigrants drop wages. With an increase in immigrants comes with people who need a living, which requires a job. This suggests a higher influx of workers. However, wage trends over the past half-century suggest that a 10% increase in the number of workers with a particular set of skills lowers the wage of that group by at least 3%. As Politico magazine states, even after the economy has adjusted to these new workers, those skill groups that receive the most immigrants will still have lower pay relative to those that receive fewer immigrants. According to census data, immigrants admitted in the past 2 decades lacking a high school diploma have increased the size of the low-skilled workers by roughly 25%. As a result, the earnings of this particularly vulnerable group dropped by between $800 and $1,500 a year. Between 2000 and 2005, the number of jobless natives aged 18 to 64 with no education beyond a high school diploma increased by over $2 million. 2 million to 23 million, according to the current population survey. During the same period, the number of less educated immigrants holding a job grew 1.5 million. By restricting these types of immigrants, we may not need as much. We can protect our native-born workers while simultaneously giving a select group of immigrants a chance to grow the economy. Contention 2. Limited resources. Though legal immigrants may have the money to pay, the U.S. may find it may not have enough resources to supply these immigrants. Consider this. According to CNN, roughly 1 million legal immigrants immigrate to the United States each year. Pile this on things like our doctor shortage. An expected doctor shortage of 100,000 is expected by 2030, which means that more than 100,000 people can't get immediate medical attention. This creates increased ER wait times and decreases preventative care, snowballing the whole issue with a 5% increased chance in death for every single minute of extra wait in the ER. Another big job that's been suffering shortages are pilots. According to CNN Money, we simply won't have enough pilots for everyone to travel commercially. Air travel prices will soar and people have to wait longer than ever to travel. Contrary to public belief, immigrants don't help grow the economy as much as we think they do. According to NPR News, Mexican immigrants alone sent a record of $69 billion back this year, depleting our businesses from potential customers and banks from investments. In addition to harming the poorest and least educated American workers, our immigration system has created a burden for taxpayers. The best predictor of poverty and welfare dependence is the educational level. Given the low educational level of most immigrants, we would expect them to be a drain on public coffers. This is the case. In 1997, the National Academy of Sciences estimated that immigrant households consume $20 billion more in public services than they pay in taxes each year. Adjusted for inflation, this number would be more than $40 billion today. Immigrants like these strain our resources and stay in the U.S., taking away the opportunities of native workers and failing to grow the economy by sending money home. They also use people we have in short supply like pilots and doctors. Let's prioritize those who are willing to give everything they have for the U.S. So because immigrants drop wages and we have limited resources for them, Judge, I urge a pro ballot. Thank you.
I believe it's on crossing, right? Okay, would you like to stand or no?
I may stand, yeah.
Okay. Opponents ready? Partner ready?
I'm ready.
Judge ready? Okay. Sweet, let's begin. So for your first piece of evidence, you mentioned that a 10% increase leads to a 3% decrease in wages, correct?
Right.
Can you give me the source for that card?
Right. I believe, let me see. Could you, is this my second contention?
No, this is your first contention.
First contention? Okay, sweet.
Your very first card, I believe. Or one of those two.
Okay. Right, okay, I believe that was Politico magazine.
Can you give me the example of the person who wrote the study? Because I don't think the magazine wrote it, right?
Here's my card. It says George A. Boreas.
Okay, thank you. That's all I need.
Okay.
Okay, so to move on to your second contention, you said that Mexican immigrants send money back, correct?
Right.
Does this apply to all immigrants?
Yeah, sure.
It does. Why would it apply to all immigrants and not just Mexican?
Well, I'm just giving an example for Mexican immigrants. Like, Mexican immigrants alone sends back $69 billion.
So this is just Mexico. Okay, thank you. So then,
Okay, may not be.
in the end of your second contention, you mentioned that immigrants use up $20 billion in public services, something like that.
So it says the National Academy of Science estimated that immigrant households consume $20 billion more in public services than they pay in taxes each year.
And what year was that?
1997. So adjusted for inflation, this number would be more than $40 billion today.
So then you mentioned that we do not have enough resources to sustain immigrants, correct?
Right.
Is it not possible that these immigrants could fill the shortage by becoming doctors and pilots, etc.?
I'm a little confused. Could you elaborate more on that? So you say that these immigrants are going to become doctors and pilots?
Why is it yes? Why wouldn't they become pilots and doctors if they?
Well, for example, okay, I have my card. I can find it later for you. Maybe in a future cross-ex or defense, I can read it. But it says basically, according to theatlantic.com, only 9,026 doctors applied for visas to the U.S. Like they got in with visas.
I'm talking about.
I've been saying 1 million immigrants, according to CNN, immigrated here, legal immigrants.
So only doctors, but what about those that could develop to doctors? Not all immigrants will stay in their current occupation for the rest of their lives, will they?
Well, I'm not sure about that.
Okay.
Sarah, I have 4 minutes on the clock, and I'm ready when you are. Right? So, judge ready? Opponents ready? Partner ready?
Mm-hmm.
Let's begin. Hello, my name is Sarah Burney, and my partner Andrew and I negate the result. Increased restrictions on legal immigration by the United States is beneficial. Contention 1, foundations. The United States was founded by immigrants, and if every person in the United States at this moment were to trace back their lineage and look through their ancestry, they would almost certainly find an immigrant. Taking away the amount of immigrants, or rather placing restrictions on these immigrants, would be taking away the most basic founding principles of this country. On the Statue of Liberty, there is written a poem that states, "Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. Send these, the homeless, tempest-tossed to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door." Are we to slam this golden door shut right now? This poem summarizes what the United States was built upon, and increasing the restrictions upon these immigrants would cause more negative effects than it would benefits, with one effect being the sheer humanitarian cost of turning away immigrants who are in dire need of asylum. Contention 2, economic prosperity. The U.S. economy was propelled by immigrants, and it still runs on immigrants. So these incoming individuals are coming with extreme talent and potential, thus causing an inevitable benefit to the economy. A report from ABC News 2017 states that if all immigrants were to just disappear from the U.S. workforce tomorrow, that would have a tremendous negative impact on the economy, said Daniel Costa, Director of Immigration Law and Policy Research at the Economic Policy Institute. Immigrants are overrepresented in a lot of occupations of both low and high-skilled jobs. You'd feel an impact and loss in many occupations and industries, from construction and landscape to finance and IT. Though some U.S. workers could fill some of those jobs, large gaps in several sectors would remain and cause a decline in the economy, Costa said. Immigrants earned $1.3 trillion and contributed $105 billion in state and local taxes and nearly $224 billion in federal taxes in just 2014, according to an analysis of the U.S. Census Bureau's latest American Communications Survey. In 2014, immigrants had almost $927 billion in consumer spending power. Jeremy Robbins, the executive director of Partnership for a New American Economy, added that without immigrants, there would be fewer businesses and inventions. If you look at the great companies driving the U.S. as an innovation hub, you'll see that a lot of companies were started by immigrants or the children of immigrants, like Apple or Google. Apple was co-founded by Steve Jobs, whose biological father was a Syrian refugee, and Google was founded by Sergey Brin, who was born in Moscow. Though immigrants make up about 13% of the U.S. population, they contribute nearly 15% of the country's economic output. This collection of data and expert analysis reaffirms that immigrants cause a wave of benefits, and increasing the restrictions on these immigrants would just be depriving the country of economic prosperity. In addition, these immigrants who are coming in with all this potential and talent, they tend to be younger, thus effectively slowing the aging of the U.S. workforce. And these low-skilled workers who tend to enter, they increase the supply of high-skilled natives by providing cheap childcare or other jobs that would allow more highly skilled natives to work longer hours to fulfill more services. Immigrants bring prosperity, and these talented people enter to enrich and revolutionize entire industries in this country. And thus, immigrants are a vital part of the economic structure of the United States, as well as the foundations of the United States, and it is a summation of the morals and purposes. We are meant to give these people an opportunity to change their own lives, to change their families' lives, and to change the world. And if we were to suddenly place increase restrictions on these people, that would not only hurt the immigrants themselves, but it would hurt our country. And this is why, Judge, I urge a con ballot. Thank you.
You also stated that
Quick, I
having
have 2 minutes on the clock.
You also recollect that I said that we should prioritize that. You recollect that? But I believe that also basically workers are
And my time starts now.
because
So would you agree with me to say that there are some immigrants that aren't beneficial to the U.S.?
I would not, because I believe that every single person does have
What's your
some
evidence for this?
evidence as to why.
That there isn't a single immigrant that will hurt the U.S. That
Well, essentially, you can't tell based on their current condition. Yes, there are some people who, I guess, would cause a strain,
All right,
but
thank
every.
Okay. So moving on to my next question, you said that immigrants bring a lot of economic prosperity, correct?
Correct.
So if we just impose restrictions on those who don't bring economic prosperity, then nothing will change except like maybe the economic prosperity in the U.S. will go up.
There is absolutely no way to tell who will bring prosperity and who will not. It's a matter of recognizing potential, and these people, even the children of these immigrants, are going on to do great things. As I mentioned,
And can you provide evidence saying that there's no way to recognize potential for this?
that's just a logical assumption that can be made, or not even assumption, it's just common sense that you can't really tell what person will achieve what based on what position they're in at the moment. For example, Steve Jobs, his
Thank you very much. And also, in your first contention, you said that like foundations were basically the foundations of the U.S. were by immigrants. But are you aware that the resolution states the whole world? So like, how would your first contention even compare?
the resolution is based on the United States.
No, it's restrictions by the United States is beneficial. So it's not for the United States, it's by the United States.
Why doesn't it apply to the U.S.?
However, why doesn't this apply to the United States as restricting immigrants?
Right, but your impact is just only in one country. What about the rest of the world?
But that's outside the scope of this argument in that
No, it's not. The resolution states is beneficial, meaning the whole world.
Okay, I will take 1 minute of prep, please.
Yeah, you did the prep time before our case, which is a little. I was still thinking of
And
okay.
yeah,
because I'm thinking it might like have
the actors as the U.S. should do this, and by that, that the U.S. the actors have more obligation to the U.S. government to protect its citizens in the country. So therefore, that means that this act does be applied to the United States. Is that 30 seconds? Okay, I'll take another minute total. Shortage immigrants or images that could be coming. Before House plans a year ago, because that's like 22 million images within a few months, which is that's a pretty sensitive. And then I'll get these cards, and then what does it help us with? It actually helps a lot. He gets a 20 billion, but that was back in 1997, and Mexican cards show these images have helped a lot more. Mexico sends money back as only one country, so I can't really apply to just overall. And that's basically all I need. Okay, that's good. How much time is that?
5 seconds. So you have 2 or 5.
Okay. Every second count. Okay. Give me a second to reorder this. Okay. Opponents ready? Partner ready?
Yes.
Judge ready? My time begins now. So I'd like to begin by addressing our opponents made. They say that this applies to the entire world. However, if you go back to the resolution, it states that the United States should implement these, whether or not the United States should implement these restrictions. The U.S. in this case is the actor. And since the U.S. government has the obligation to protect its citizens and its country, therefore it can easily be inferred that the main area of this argument is towards the United States. Having said that, let's move on to our opponent's case. Their first contention was about economic detriment, and they bring up this Borahas card about 10% increase in workers leads to a 3% decrease in wage. First off, this card itself is entirely irrelevant because if you read on in the study, it's based off the assumption that 22 million immigrants are immigrating to Miami within 2 months, within a span of a few months. As this is completely impossible and unresponsible, then that card can be entirely removed. In fact, if you look at the evidence actually suggests that the opposite is true, that allowing immigration grows the economy. First off, according to the Cato Institute, displacement effect of wages is small, if at all. At most, the expected effect is only about 0.24% of the GDP, even when you only look at the native-born workers and ignore the immigrant workers. In reality, there is no real negative effect. In fact, the effect can actually be beneficial, and that jobs can actually grow. This is easily explained through a logical situation, and if you go to the Journal of Regional Science, they write that firms respond to an increase in the supply of labor by expanding their businesses. Thus, an increased supply of labor as a result of immigration is easily absorbed into the labor market as a result of an increased demand of labor. As this shows, there's no reason for wages to go down because with an increase of immigrants, it allows to a growing of the business. And the growing of the business, we can take in more immigrants, allowing to growth to the economy without detriment to wages. Now, let's move on to their second contention, in which they argue that there are not enough resources to support these immigrants. This, however, is completely untrue, as these immigrants can become the resources that America needs. First, according to the... According to Migration Policy Institute, in 2014, U.S. immigrants had an average college, about 30% of all immigrants in the United States had a college degree, 30% of this. And this is really closely related to America's, which is about 33% of native-born citizens. So as this shows, these immigrants have all the potential in the world to become these resources that this country needs, thus negating that argument. Finally, our opponents bring up these cards about how, first off, that Mexico sends money back, and secondly, that $20 billion was spent more spent on immigrants than they gave back to the economy. First off, in regards to the Mexico card, our opponents admitted that this was merely for one of many countries that immigrated to the United States, and therefore cannot be really considered as what happens to all immigrants. Secondly, the $20 billion card was from back in 1997, but recently, in the present, immigrants have become a much bigger part of the economy. My partner read to you the multiple cards about the amount of money that immigrants pay in taxes, that they pay in, that they give back to the economy, and overall, according to the National Academy of Science, Engineering, and Medicine, in 2016, 26 million foreigners in the American labor force added some $2 trillion to the American economy last year. Thus, I urge a con ballot. Thank you. Oh, I still got it. Never mind.
I'll take 45 seconds.
Wait, aren't you... does she cross-ex me before? Okay.
Oh, never mind. Okay.
Yeah, because if you want to use it for the cross-ex.
Okay, I have 2 minutes on the clock and I'm ready when you are.
Alright, and I'm cross-sexing. David, do you have anything to say to me? Alright, and my time starts now. Okay, so in your rebuttal speech, you say that, Mexico is only one country, but if Mexico alone gives away $69 billion back to its own country, wouldn't other countries give more, so it literally wouldn't matter if it's just one country?
Not necessarily, because the situation of Mexico is different than that, say, of China, which is one of the largest.
Yes, but wouldn't other countries also give back money? Like immigrants from other countries also give back money?
Well, they give back money, but they also make a lot of money for the American economy. As I read to you in my card, the 26 million immigrants in the American labor force created $2 trillion. That's a ninth of America's GDP.
Right. We're not saying that immigration is bad. We're just saying that some immigrants just take up welfare and they don't do anything to benefit the economy. So shouldn't we restrict
some
those
native
immigrants?
workers don't do anything and take up welfare. Why don't we kick those out?
Because we don't have the power to do that. We have the power to restrict immigrants, but we don't have the power to restrict native workers.
Isn't that discrimination? So you'd rather allow native workers just because of where they were born and therefore deny the potential
No, because we literally have no power to do that. If we could, then maybe we can. But we do have the power to affect the lives of everyone else in the U.S. by restricting these immigrants.
So I'd like to make a point here. You seem to have an idealistic idea where we can weed out every single immigrant who you deem is unsuccessful and therefore kick them out.
No, only certain immigrants.
Well, how do you know certain immigrants? Steve Jobs' dad was a Syrian refugee.
Yes, but a refugee is not an immigrant.
A refugee, why wouldn't it be an immigrant?
Alright. So the definition of refugee says, refugee is a status form of protection that may be granted to people who are of particular humanitarian concern to the United States. That is not an immigrant.
And yet this is somebody that, at first glance, would not have contributed to the economy, and yet he gave birth to one of the greatest technological innovators of our time. This point still stands even if it's refugees or immigrants.
Thank you, but Steve Jobs' dad wouldn't have been restricted because he was a refugee, not an immigrant.
So you'd say that, okay, they have to come from a poor
example is
nation.
invalid.
So you have to come from a poor nation, and that's how you get accepted, right? So even if they have the most potential in the world. Damn it, I'm on.
Judge, ready? My time starts now. Judge, as my opponents admitted in the crossfire, there are immigrants that don't do anything for the U.S. economy. In fact, they just negatively impact 99 million other Americans around them by decreasing their wages and even taking them out of jobs. In fact, regions with large populations of less educated, low-income immigrants force natives and even immigrants that live in that area to bear significant net costs due to immigrants' excessive use of services, especially education. And this came from the University of Pennsylvania. So, okay, it's not just native workers that's being harmed, it's the immigrants that are around them. And this impacts 99 million Americans. So some immigrants that are only just going to benefit themselves are going to come into a different country, and then they're going to negatively affect everyone around them. That is inhumane to me, not the fact that we're not going to let them in the United States in the first place. In addition, there's something else called brain drain. And brain drain means that there's so if a lot of smart people, if a lot of doctors and people immigrate to the U.S., then the countries that they left won't have that many people. And the potential cost of brain drain is extremely great. So this not only is a loss of skills, it's a loss of innovation for that country, it's a loss of nation's investment in education, it's a loss in tax revenue, and it's a loss of critical education factors. So by restricting immigrants, we not only help fix the problem of brain drain, which impacts the economy and all of the other countries in the world. And as the resolution states, the resolution is global because it's restrictions by the U.S. is beneficial. That's what it says. So it obviously means the whole entire world. And then moving on to their second contention about economic prosperity, just as I said, there are some immigrants that don't do anything for the economy. All they do is they take up welfare and they just decrease the wages of everyone else around them, and then they make a net fiscal burden for all the 333 million Americans that live in the U.S. And then moving on to my opponent's attack speech, so they said that there's so for our overpopulation, for our second contention, they said that immigrants have 30% of immigrants have college degrees. However, 40% of immigrants don't even have a high school diploma. They have either a high school graduation or less. So how does that even compare? Because even if college immigrants or immigrants that have graduated from college have degrees, and that's a comparable population to the U.S., it doesn't matter because a lot of immigrants are low paying and they have low wages. And in addition, a study stated that college immigrant workers will actually going to earn $200 less than poorer workers. So it wouldn't even matter if it wouldn't matter of the education. And they also said Mexico is only one country. But if Mexico alone gives $69 billion back to the economy, then how much would other countries do? And for these reasons, I urge a approval.
There are many workers from the United States and the United States who are willing to take those jobs. They have no true statistics that show that people are not willing to take jobs, and they're going to find them now.
Back where? So ask that.
Firstly, I consider that solidarity is
Okay.
This is extremely negative. We can have a system where people are unable to get health care provided in their own country or are unable to have economic success. For these reasons, this can be Judge, ready? Opponents ready? To the country and to a person's life.
Oh wait, hold up. Isn't this cross-ex?
They are able to improve their own well-being as they're
You're cross-exing her, right?
No, she's cross-exing her.
and they're also able
Because I cross-exed you.
But I already crossed
the
it.
relationship between the United
No, but
States
you're
and
being
the
cross-examined.
Yeah, I'm asking
and
questions.
and the All
right, so opponent ready?
This is extremely beneficial.
Partner ready?
Mm-hmm.
I'll go into my second contention.
Let's begin. So I'd like to lead off with a question about the Mexico card. So where is this money from Mexico? Where's this money going?
Back to Mexico?
So how is this counteracts brain drain though, however, correct?
No.
However, brain drain is defined, if brain drain is taking essentially the resources of developing countries, then if these people are just sending their money back, aren't those counteracting forces?
Okay, so brain drain is taking not the resources, but people who have like high education levels, so like doctors and engineers and stuff like that.
Exactly. This is considered a resource, infrastructural resources, and they're taking their incomes away from these developing countries. But then the card is stating that these people are sending money back to their countries. So these are counteractive forces, correct?
But no, because the problem isn't the money that's being lost. Well, it is a problem, but a more important problem is the decrease of innovation, because, you know, without like doctors and engineers, there would not only be a decrease of innovation, but there would also be a doctor and engineer shortage, which would be terrible.
But why are these people leaving their home countries?
Because their home countries are poor.
And thus they don't have the infrastructure to support them, correct?
No. It's just that they want a better life for themselves.
All right, thank you. So my next question is about the brain drain connection with the immigrants being, say, not beneficial. So if brain drain is occurring, then there are highly skilled workers who are doctors and engineers who are coming into the country, and doesn't this counteract the force of these immigrants who are considered, say, useless, or they're not contributing to the economy? Are these counteractive forces?
Well, yes, but if we were to limit the amount of, like, excuse my language, bad stuff that came into the U.S., then that would just make the U.S. a better place.
Speech will begin now. So right now I'm going to start with a framework attack. So basically they said that the U.S. has the obligation to their country, that this resolution actually attacks like the U.S., right? And then that like our framework still stands. But our framework still stands because like, so even if there is one extra immigrant, like one extra immigrant that we can restrict, Pro wins the debate because the resolution says increase restrictions on legal immigrants. And then next they said the primary aim of the U.S. is to their own country, so they're willing to sacrifice all the other nations, like countless amounts of nations for the short-term benefit of the U.S. And then just take a look at my partner's brain drain argument. It said that potential costs of brain drain are loss of skills, decrease in innovation, decrease in nations' investments in education, and decrease in tax revenues. As I said earlier, immigrants actually kick out jobs and actually decrease wages. For example, it's just going to, right, so speaking of short term, my opponents are actually looking into the future without regard for the present. So they said that, since workers will be able to take in more immigrants, as I said, quote unquote, the workforce, immigrants will be easily absorbed into the workforce. Clearly that's not the case. What about those people that have been kicked out of jobs? Do we really expect them to wait 10, 20 years for the economy to grow so they can get a job again? Do we really expect them to stay out in the streets for 10 to 20 years? This is completely inhumane and contradicts their points of helping immigrants. Think about it. If you're an immigrant and you spent forever trying to get to the U.S., and when you finally did get into the U.S., another immigrant kicked you out of the job, and you were expected to wait 20 years for the economy to grow so you could get back into the job, that shouldn't be the case here in the U.S. Yeah. And then they also said for my second contention that limited resources, that in fact immigrants could actually become the resources that we need. But unfortunately, as I said in my earlier cross-examination, according to the Atlantic, the Atlantic magazine, what happens is that there's only 9,026 doctors that come into the United States, right? They're trying to use this number to apparently offset the amount of 1 million immigrants that are coming into the United States. 9,026 doctors is nowhere near enough to offset the 1 million other people that are coming in with these 9,026 doctors. So our second contention still stands. So because our framework still stands, we're our framework, and because our two contentions still stands, I urge a pull out.
It's constructed so they can win because they obviously don't have any evidence to support their argument. We'll take a minute, please. Actually, just ignore that. I'll just say that the framework is completely irrational. It's a framework irrational, right? I just consider it for one argument. They again think about the end that your sentence would have, but there's no statistical evidence or logical evidence, so we can ignore all of that. There's no job being lost, and money is being gained. That's why we can't put that into the sexual dramas from comic books. You're losing trillions of dollars just because of a couple that you don't like.
Our framework is still way true, but you can't basically that potential one extra person included in the restricted and the offset.
Okay, we're good. How much prep time do we have left?
Right. So, Judge, ready?
For instance, I once also said that one example is not
Okay.
enough. So I'll give another example.
Opponent ready?
20% of immigrants are underemployed.
Partner ready?
Seems like
Yep.
a rather larger issue, and therefore
Let's begin. So first, I will begin the speech by going through the contentions included in our opening speech, and if time allows, then I will address some of the opponent's points. So our first contention was about the foundations of the United States, which was not met at all by the opponent. It still stands that the United States was founded by immigrants, that immigration is an essential part of the country. And now moving to our second contention, which is seen as a little more heavily weighted. So economically, the opponents have been stating that immigrants are taking money from the United States, they're taking the jobs, and they've only provided one source, which we prove does not hold, which the Borjas piece of evidence, while we have provided multiple cards that state that immigrants are bringing in such a large net profit, and they aren't doing much to decrease the wages of low-skilled workers. They aren't necessarily taking the jobs of the natives. And now we'll move to the opponents who said that they stated brain drain as one of the large contentions. However, this completely counteracts their entire argument that's stating that there are bad immigrants coming to the United States. There are useless immigrants coming to the United States who are abusing welfare. However, if this brain drain is occurring, then we're having good immigrants coming in as well. So should we really block these bright and talented people from entering the country just because there's a few people who aren't necessarily doing much to help the economy? And moving to the merit system argument, this is not feasible. There's no way to figure out who has what potential. You can't tell if their children will have potential, what their future generations will do. And this is just based on subjectivity. It would cost loads of money to implement. It would cost an immense amount of public backlash because there is no way to objectively tell who has more potential than another person. And thus, their arguments economically, we win this argument economically as we have provided cards that state that immigrants are beneficial, and we also win the moral aspect of this debate as we are showing that that the foundations of the United States are being upheld, the principles are being upheld, and for these reasons, Judge, I urge a con ballot. Thank you.
Opponents ready? Yes. Judge ready? And my time starts. Judge, I'd like to start off by saying that our opponents said we provided no evidence besides our Borjas evidence, but I did record my rebuttal that stated that regions with large populations of educated, low-income immigrants make native or other immigrants around that area bear significant costs for like welfare and things like that. And also, that's also another way to see who has potential or not. Like generally, less educated, low-income immigrants have less potential. And also, their example about Steve Jobs wouldn't hold because he was a Syrian refugee, not an actual immigrant. So, Judge, both sides of this debate have made a critical mistake because we've been giving you statistic out of statistic. But statistics do not tell stories of immigrants. People do. So in Venezuela, there wasn't enough staff to operate the hospital because thousands of people left to migrate to the U.S. because of brain drain, and some of these people were doctors, and they could have helped these hospitals. And one morning, 3 newborn babies died, and the doctors stated that this was a regular occurrence, that newborn babies dying was his regular diet. And if there's a chance that we can save people in other countries, then we have to take it. And we have to restrict immigrants from coming to the U.S. so they can stay in their own countries and they can help their people and their own countries. And 99 million Americans are being negatively affected by immigrants that come into the U.S. and they use up a bunch of welfare, they decrease wages for everyone, and they also just kick people out of their jobs. And if there's a chance that these 99 million people can't suffer, then we have to take it. And also, if immigrants come into the U.S. and they just take up a bunch of money and they take up a bunch of welfare, that'll negatively impact the economy, which impacts the whole world because the U.S. represents 1/4 of the world's GDP, and it also is the world's largest trading partner, and it's the world's largest export and immigration center. And if there's a chance that we can protect this, we have to take it. And for these reasons, I urge pro ballot.
Judge ready. My time begins now. So I'd like to begin by addressing their framework. Their framework, a complete crap. It is irrational and it is an easy way to win. It is impossible to make sure that every single immigrant that comes to the United States is actually a helpful immigrant. However, if the benefits of allowing these immigrants to come outweigh the negatives, then by any logical standpoint, we should allow these immigrants to come. Now, this debate comes down to two things. It comes down to the economic side of this argument and the moral side of this argument. In regards to the economic side of the argument, first off, our opponents yet again have failed to provide any numbers. We have disproven their Borjas card, and everything else has merely been stated without any actual statistical evidence to back it up. Meanwhile, we have provided you evidence to show that these immigrants are making $2 trillion for the economy, that they have $962 billion to spend and to give back to the economy. These are actual substantive economic benefits that we have provided for you, while our opponents have provided none. Evidently, we win the economic side of this argument. Our opponents brought up the argument of brain drain midway through the debate, but yet this argument still does not stand. They admitted in Crossfire that they are leaving because many of these countries are poor and underdeveloped. There's no evidence to suggest that these doctors, that these physicians will be able to develop and grow the same way that they would in these developing countries. By allowing them to come to the United States, we gain the advantage and the benefit that comes from the remittances that they send back to the country, therefore negating their brain drain argument. Finally, we come down to the moral side of this debate. Our opponents have repeatedly failed to address our issue about the foundations of this country and how this country was built on immigration. Immigration is what spurred the growth of this country, the technological growth, the innovation, and by denying these immigrants access, it is you are denying one of the main founding roots of this country. A main example is in the Syrian refugee. They bring up this, they try to say that the Steve Jobs case is actually not allowed because it's a refugee, but that is merely a technicality. What is there to suggest that immigrants coming from other countries will not have the same look, but provide the same potential as the Steve Jobs case? There is none, and therefore the Steve Jobs example still stands. So overall, if you take a step back, you can see that by allowing immigrants to come to the United States, it provides both an economic benefit as well as maintaining one of the moral roots of this country, and for those reasons, I urge a calm ballot. Thank you.